Hello, and welcome to the next episode of The Prestige, a podcast about films, filmmaking, and film theory.
In each programme, we'll focus on a particular movie, and we're going to talk about it, give it a bit of a review, and discuss some of the ideas and themes that it throws up.
And as always, we'll end with our recommendations for films to watch following this week's film. The links are going to be as close or as tenuous as we want, and half the time they're just an excuse to talk about films we like.
Quite. You don't really need to know much about us. If you haven't listened to this before, then where have you been? If you have listened to it before, then you know that Rob makes films and talks about films, and I teach about books and write about books and bits of pop culture as well.
Fair enough. And this week, Sam, in an attempt to save yourself from your last recommendation of Lone Ranger,
yes,
you've picked FOXCATCHER.
Do you have any idea who I am? Some rich guy calls you on the phone. I wanted to speak with you about what you hope to achieve. What do you hope to achieve, Mark?
I want to be the best in the world.
Good.
There's a key for you. Also, big house is off limits. Okay.
Coach DuPont has a vision.
FOXCATCHER, a film from 2015 by... Was it 2015? No, it was earlier than that.
14, I think.
14. I should know these things. This is my film, I should know.
You should. It is 14, it's fine.
Oh, it's 14, fine. Right. Bennett Miller directed FOXCATCHER 2014. And it's about the real-life story of two wrestling brothers, Mark and Dave Schultz, who both win Olympic gold, though at different weights, in 1984, and then are approached by the rich eccentric John DuPont, who wants to sponsor them both to success in 1988. Now, that is as much as I'm going to say about it, because I would say at this point, if you think this is the sort of film that you want to see, then stop listening now and go away and see it, because it's very difficult to talk about it without spoiling anything for anyone. I know it's possible to find out what the story is about by Googling it, but if you haven't, then and you want to preserve that for yourself, then go away now and watch the film. It's really interesting, real life story. These things actually happened, although not in the way it's portrayed in the film. Although I have just been reading an article which talks about how Bennett Miller used fiction to get at truth. It was an interesting way of putting it. So made stuff up about the lives of the Schultz and DuPont to get at underlying truths about their relationships. Rob, your thoughts?
I didn't like it.
Okay.
I'd qualify that a little bit more than that, obviously. It's a bit of a headline review. I think that the film was very interesting at times, but had large sections where I was bored out of my mind.
Right.
These were predominantly the sections that focused more on Steve Carell's character than Channing Tatum or Mark Ruffalo's. I thought the two brothers, the Schultz brothers, were brilliant. I really liked both their portrayals. I thought Channing Tatum particularly did great work in kind of stepping away from his normal sort of role, and I think that Mark Ruffalo did some amazing work in sort of the physicalization of an old wrestler. Yeah, it was Mark Ruffalo, but it clearly wasn't Mark Ruffalo in the same way we see him in other kind of films. It comes back down to the fact to me that I just don't like Steve Carell as an actor. I don't think he's very good. I don't think he's very funny. I've never really enjoyed him in anything he's made, really. And I just thought whenever he was on screen, the film just dipped. Right. I thought the film looked lovely in places, in a kind of watered down style. I think it nailed the era, but in the bottom line was I was bored for large parts of it.
Okay. All right.
Sam.
Yes. not to disagree with you completely, but no, I'm not going to.
But you're wrong.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. I'm not disagreeing with you. Entirely, I just think that. Well, actually, I have gone through periods of not liking Steve Carell myself, and I still don't think he's funny. I still think he's a rubbish comic actor. But I think in a film like this, I enjoyed it very much. I enjoyed his portrayal of Dupont. And actually, I think that the lulls that bored you were intentional. Because I think the whole thing about this film is building up to moments of releasing tension. And I think you have something like Steve Carell slapping Channing Tatum was the most extraordinarily shocking thing to me. And I think it only was that shocking because it had been so mundane leading up to it. That hadn't been the rhythm of the film leading up to it. And then you have something like the sort of, I suppose, the central point of the film, which is sort of tacked on the end like a coda, which shocks you. And it shocks you so much because it comes out of this period of relative inactivity with Steve Carell. So I agree with you that I do think there were lulls, but I think what Miller is doing is intentional.
I can totally agree with that. I think it certainly felt like it was ratcheting up tension. I would say that it did well. Like from the opening scene, there's a deep unease to the film, and it felt that you knew something bad was going to happen, and in a good way. Not in the kind of like you know it can happen, but like there's very much an air from day one of what this is. These relationships are a doomed relationship. Something bad is going to happen. For me, it just could have been maybe 40 minutes shorter.
Okay, right. Yeah.
It just felt that there were pits where, I get you're building something, but I'm just bored now. I'm just bored of all of this. And I get it. I get it. Now, John DuPont is a weird guy who had trust issues and needed to be liked. I get all of that. I didn't need to be shown it 3-4 times.
Right.
But I think it's one of those films where it's all about the journey, and if you like the journey, brilliant. Like it is about that journey. It isn't about hitting plot points. It's about that journey through. And if you enjoy that, fine. I didn't for this film, but I totally get why some people would love this film.
Right. Yeah. And I am one of those people. I love this film. I love the narrative of it. But I can see what you're saying, actually. There are some films, I think, that in a discussion with you, I could quite happily, if we disagreed, say, you're totally wrong, how can you not see this? This is an amazing film. But
like Mad Max.
It will, in reverse, yeah, I can...
Yes.
there's a clash there, but with this film, I am totally comfortable with the fact that you didn't like it for the reasons you've laid out. It just makes sense. If you like the way this film goes, then you love the film, and if you don't, then you don't.
And I think I'd agree. I think for me, it's a taste thing. It's not that I think like we've talked a little bit about, but like Lone Ranger, I would have say it was a bad film, and I don't think this is a bad film. It's not a bad film. It's a well-made, well-shot, well-acted film. It's just not my taste.
Right. Yeah.
But that being said, we are here for more than just a review of the film.
Yes.
It is an interesting film in certain terms.
It is. Something that I wanted to talk about, something that came up throughout watching this film, really, and particularly in the Steve Carell bits, was the idea of nostalgia. And we talked about nostalgia a while back when we were talking about Jurassic World, and this is, I think it's interesting enough to come back to about 6 months later. But also, I think this is a different sort of nostalgia, because we were talking about our own nostalgia there, We were talking about looking back on 20 years of having seen films to the first Jurassic Park film. And this is very different. This is a nostalgia that I suppose is sort of encapsulated in a moment when I think it's in episode where Steve Carell finally gets a gun that he's been wanting affixed to a tank, and they bring it into the office, and he says, "Yes, take it away." And it's obvious his mind's on other things, so his mind is on the Schultz brothers. But there is a flag above his head, and the flag has 45 stars on it. And looking at the exact moment in time when there were 45 and not 46 states of America, this film, like you said, this film hits the period beautifully that it portrays. It's rooted in the 80s, but it also hits this time for John DuPont, because the time between the 45th and 46th state was the turn of the century. It was Utah in 1896 and then Oklahoma in 1907. Between those two, there were 45 states. And it seems like John DuPont is harking back to that time. All the way through, he's saying, I want to go back to when America was great. I want... And you see is it Dave or Mark? No, it's Mark watching the video. Watching the video of the DuPont family, and talks about how they were a pillar of American society. But this all seems to be... It's kind of like, as you were saying at the beginning of the film, you know something's going to go wrong. There's a sort of doomed nature to this nostalgia.
I would just add one little moment that I agree entirely with what you're saying. I think one of the moments that highlights that to me is the scene you mentioned earlier where DuPont slaps Mark in the face. And that comes after a scene in which the wrestlers take the morning off to watch MMA, to mix martial arts wrestling. And that very much felt like the incursion of the new.
Yes.
This is the new world, the new way, like that in time, that kind of MMA is slowly replacing that old school style of wrestling. Like modern wrestling still exists, the kind of the showy WWE stuff, but that old, like almost Greco-Roman wrestling has been in turn replaced by MMA. And this felt like the anger from John DuPont at that scene was not only about sort of his mentee standing up to him, but also the idea that they'd stepped away from what he thought was true and right and honourable wrestling towards something newer. And I think that part of that in that character felt to me coming from a place of fear.
Yes.
That as time goes on and these things change, that old money that the DuPont family are matters less and less.
Yeah.
Those great American families, the DuPonts, the Rockefellers, that kind of thing, they just don't matter in the modern world as they used to. And it feels like a lot of this was his reaction to the fact that he can no longer control it. Like, DuPonts could obviously control the world. There's a long-running thing in the film about how he wants to get the other Schultz brother with him, and he just thinks, well, I want it. And he has no understanding of you can't just get what you want. You can't buy an Oscar, a gold medal. You can't buy these things. And he has no concept of the idea that you can't just have these things. Evidenced by the tank and the gun. And the unravelling of his worldview, I think, is what leads us to the final scene, certainly. And that's how the film pitched it, as I saw it, that they were saying this guy hangs on to these old school, even American, old world ideals, but he's coming up against the modern world where, not everyone who works for you is a serf to order around.
Yes. It's interesting, actually, that transfers into wrestling, because he thinks that he is going to pump money into this program, into the FOXCATCHER program, and there will be gold medals at the end of it. And he says at one point, what we're doing here is giving America hope. That's not what they're doing. What they're doing is giving John DuPont relevance. they're returning to a time when you could put money into something and have a result at the end of it that you'd planned for. Whereas that's not how competition works.
I'd even go a little bit further than that. I think that they try to harken back to a time that never really existed. There's a sort of running through this film. There's this idea of friendship that comes up a few times, and John DuPont tells a story about how his only friend growing up, he discovered, was being paid by his mum to be his friend. And then several times you see it that John DuPont is very keen that Channing Tatum's character is his friend. He's very keen for them to be friends. He's very keen that Mark is his friend. But Mark isn't his friend in the long term. And you feel that DuPont is constantly searching for this idealised memory of what it used to be. That he used to have friends. He's searching for this model of the world that he imagines. But he's never really existed. He's never really experienced it. But he's always in his mind. He has this world view, and as you say, it's like he could buy a gold medal, he could hire friends, and it's a weird kind of. You feel like he wants people to really be his friends, but he doesn't know how to make them his friends.
And if you think about it like that, it's just so sad that he was acting like that, but everyone around him acts like that. You have his mother buying him friends. You also have he enters that veterans competition, and his second in command pays someone to take a fall so that he can win the title. And it's just everyone around him is making that impossible.
Yeah, I think there's, whilst I want to in no way excuse, we'll get into spoilers territory now, I think we're 20 minutes into the podcast. I want to in no way excuse the murder that happens at the end of the film. There is a lot to be said for the fact that this man had lived an entire life with everything going exactly how he wanted it to, or within his power to kind of just have stuff that he wants. Cocaine. He hires basically a Olympic wrestler to sing his praises at some sort of large event, and he parades him off like a toy, like a pet. And then he butts up against Mark Ruffalo's character, David Schultz, who just doesn't seem to play by those rules. He won't just give John what he wants. He says no for a long time to come to FOXCATCHER. He works out a deal where Mark always gets paid, and he just doesn't. He isn't bought over by John's money or wealth or name or these things. And tellingly, the line that is said by John before the murder is, "Do you have a problem with me?"
Yeah.
And you get the feeling that no one's ever had a problem with him. That no one's ever gone, "No, John. No, you can't have that." Or, no one's ever sort of stood up to him and said, no, like, he's lived in a world entire life where his money and his name could get him everything, and here it couldn't.
That reminded me, actually, of another film you didn't like. But
there are many.
The Ben Kingsley character in Sexy Beast, where he will not take no for an answer.
Yes.
And he doesn't understand how anyone could say no to him. And it's kind of different. It's different violence as against money, but it's still about power. It's still about not being able to comprehend how anyone could ever stand up to you.
I think you bring on the mother figure in the film for John is an interesting one, because he's the duality of this, that he doesn't understand not getting his own way, but he's so controlled by his desire for approval from his mother. The scene in which he has his champion, his first place trophy, and he wants to put it in, I think it's the Roosevelt box, or he wants to put it in one cabinet in the trophy room, and his mum says you can put it in there but not in that box. And I mean, she's not doesn't be a very nice mum, but he seems so determined for her affection, and there's a scene when he's demonstrating wrestling moves to the team, but ostensibly really for his mum. So he demonstrates for his mother the rules he's making, and she leaves because he doesn't do it very well, and you just see him physically just deflate, and there's that kind of it's strange. He's seeking so much for approval, but at the same time, not understanding that it's his very actions that mean he doesn't get it.
Yeah.
He certainly seems to externalise all of that, and it's their problem. His mum's evil, his Mark's useless, Steve's useless. He externalises a lot of that, when he can't really see that it's really his actions that's driving everyone away.
That scene is really interesting. The way that when she is watching him, he very, very consciously, very obviously clears a space for her. So he choreographs the wrestlers. People often, and I wanted to talk briefly about it later, about choreographing wrestling and it being as much dancing as sport. But he very definitely choreographs his wrestlers and says, you need to sit there so there is a sight line for my mother. And that seems to be a concern of this film, because there are several... There's one particular documentary within this film with an interviewer talking to Dave on camera, but how people are viewed seems to be important. And there's, after Mark and John have had a falling out, John comes over and there's a camera there with him as well. So the gaze seems to be important throughout this.
I think you make a good point there. I think that there's the choreographed nature of a lot of it is very interesting, and there's a big scene, important scene, in which the two brothers negotiate a payment. But one of the things that John wants in repayment is that he will be in the corner at the Olympics. And John often talks about being a coach and what a coach does, but it's very clear that throughout most of the film that really David Schultz, the coach, he's the one doing a lot of the work of a coach. It's all choreographed. It's all about shirts. All about kind of the face of it all, But the tank is a great example. The tank and the gun. He's never going to really drive or fire that tank.
No.
But it's important to him that it looks right. He knows there should be a gun there. There should be a gun there. He gets the gun. He doesn't. He literally looks at it and then take it away. So much of this is about the elaborate facade, the dance of his life and his role and his personal image.
That when he appears, you mentioned how he wants to sit in the corner, and I was left thinking, would Mark have won gold at Seoul if John hadn't been in his corner? Like, how upsetting was it to Mark Schultz to have Dupont around him? But that final wrestling scene, it was interesting. I was thinking, watching it, that, and I don't have enough of a vocabulary about film to say how, but it was shot in a different way from the other wrestling scenes. So it looked different. And I think that's what made me think, well, perhaps Mark's given up because John's there. Because it felt different from me watching it. So it was like Mark's experience of a wrestling match changed when John entered the ring.
Yeah, I think from my point, I think there are two things that work in that scene. One of which, as you say, it was shot differently. They used different lenses. It was shot. It was kind of much closer up, so you didn't see the moves as much. You didn't see the handhold. You just saw the faces as one person fell over, or you saw you didn't see both wrestlers. It was shot in much closer, tighter shots, which meant you weren't seeing the fight. You're just seeing the reactions. The other one, sort of going on, that you see a lot of the shots were of David and John stood there watching the fight. But the fight's in front of you. You see the wrestlers go crossing the foreground, but all obviously out of focus. And it means it's a sort of film technique that it's about what's going on in the foreground. There are no words. You just see their reactions. But the sort of the semiotics of the scene mean that you get the two. You can see the movement back and forth, and because they're already in clearly different colours, the two wrestlers. But whilst it's out of focus, you still see what's going on.
Yeah.
But I wonder how much you talk a bit more about the sort of the facade of it all. How much of the losing of Mark losing really pushed John over the edge, because he'd fought so hard to be in that corner, and then when he lost, you got to wonder how much, like, it's almost like a double failure. Like, if he hadn't fought too hard to be in that corner, it would just be a loss. But because he fought too hard to be there, suddenly his face was there next to the loser.
Yes, yeah.
If you see what I'm saying? It wasn't, like, he almost doubled down and lost both times.
Yes, and if you think about it, well, if you look at the wider picture, then Mark Schultz is still an Olympic champion, but John LeBlanc is always someone who was in a wrestler's corner and lost. Like, even before he goes properly over the edge and shoots a man, he had completely lost. And Mark always had something to fall back on. He could always say, I am Olympic champion. I won a gold medal. I did this. So it's like you said, like it was so important for Dupont to have this facade, to be able to save face. And once he was there, the only way he could go was down.
I think and linking back to that, there's another scene in which the first round, when they win the first sort of preliminaries, John makes them put all their medals in his cupboard.
Yeah.
And you feel very much like he's living vicariously through him, which is why the loss then by Mark at the end hit him even harder than it should have.
Yes, yeah. And you had there's an interesting scene actually, that one where he puts the medals in his cupboard and he's living through them. That he fakes a fall and then wrestles some of his wrestlers, and you know very quickly that they're just letting him win, because you would in that situation. But it's interesting how he's not just living vicariously through them in terms of having put money into their training and being by the side of the ring. He is actually living vicariously through them physically. It's kind of like the film is making him, I don't know, in some tactile way, try and be a part of them, because he wants to be with them and wants to hug them and wrestle with them. So that goes into this thing at the end, why it was such a defeat for him, because he actually was a part of it. He was wrestling himself.
Well, I think it's notable, just talking about the filming side of things, the fashion of it all, that he, at the start, wears a lot more FOXCATCHER branded goods, shall I say. You know, there's certainly a uniform that as a team they wear at the start of the film. And it's interesting how the costuming department mimic that change to the film. As the film goes on, he wears less and less and less, as does Mark Schultz, as does David Schultz. These kind of early blue and yellow uniform that they're all in just kind of fades over time.
Yeah.
I think that was a well done by the costume department to kind of slip that in, and kind of you feel that breakdown almost subconsciously because it's done with the fashion rather than the words and the action.
You mentioned at the very beginning how good Channing Tatum was, and I totally agree with you about that. And one of the reasons he was so good is because he was so committed to this performance, and he was so. I mean, he walked like a wrestler, and Mark Ruffalo kind of did as well. But it's even more obvious in a big man like Channing Tatum when someone walks like a wrestler, and I know from reading up about the film that in one of the wrestling scenes between the brothers, Channing Tatum broke Mark Ruffalo's eardrum. He hit him so hard. And when you see Channing Tatum headbutting a mirror in the hotel room after losing, he actually was headbutting a mirror. He actually made a dent in the wall behind a mirror and cut himself in the head. Like, he was that committed to the performance. It was that...
Was it something when he leans away afterwards, and you can see that it's all embedded in his forehead. Yeah, it certainly went all out. And maybe the first scene of wrestling, when you see the two brothers wrestling, it starts off so kind of just nice and stretching, and it does turn very physical very fast. And you do very much get the vibe that they are properly going for it.
Yeah, it moves very quickly, as I said, from stretching through sort of knockabout brothers having fun together and like pulling punches and being nice to each other, and that lasts for about 10 seconds, and then you've really got a fight on your hands, and it's actually combat.
But there is that interesting relationship between the two of them all the way through the film, that like they're brothers and they clearly got each other's back a lot of the time. But they're also antagonists between each other quite a lot as well. I think the film was, I may not have liked it, it never at any point kind of played it easy with making things too trite about between the brothers. The brothers aren't friends either, really. Or they at least aren't very nice to each other if they are friends.
No. It was. I mean, no. For example, thinking your brothers, you and your brother are particularly close, but there are plenty of examples of brothers who love each other but are not friends, and it felt like a very natural brotherly relationship. Mm-hmm. Like they obviously had each other's back, they obviously loved each other, but they were quite happy to not like each other from time to time.
So Sam, as we draw it to a close, we always do, what would you recommend we watch following this?
Well, my first is incredibly obvious. You might think it's incredibly obvious because of the subject matter, but I think the connection here is one of tone, and it's The Wrestler. And as I said, I don't think it's necessarily that this is about wrestling so much as this is a very bleak film, a very sort of toned down film, a very grey film. It felt by both of these films, where you knew from the very beginning of The Wrestler, just as you said, you do from the beginning of Foxcatcher, that something was deeply wrong and something was going to go wrong. And my other recommendation is, I would like to recommend Spotlight, although I haven't seen it yet. I would say that go and see Mark Ruffalo in Spotlight, because the trailers I've seen of it have him looking particularly good in that. But my recommendation is a film that he was in a few years ago. It's the Leonardo DiCaprio vehicle, Shutter Island.
Interesting choice. I've kind of cheated a little bit on my one this week, and I'm recommending a film that we've already covered on the podcast. One of our very early episodes. It's a 2011 film, Warrior. It's about two brothers who fight. It has family dynamics. It has certainly a violent ending. Was not be as kind of tragic as this. It's in that kind of genre of sports films that really aren't about sport. And that's one thing we didn't touch on this week, is that obviously as a sports film, the sport doesn't matter here, really, beyond being a plot device for something else. So I think that Warrior, it was brilliant then, it's brilliant now. I can only recommend it again.
Right.
My other recommendation, I've also gone down the Ruffalo route and recommended one of his previous works. In this case, it's a 2001 film, The Last Castle. Last Castle was vaguely well known at the time, but has kind of dropped off in the sort of 15 years since. It's a role for Robert Redford and James Gandolfini. They're the two main roles in it. Robert Redford plays a court-martialed army general sent to military prison, and he rallies the inmates against the warden, played by Gandolfini. And Ruffalo is in it. He is brilliant in it, and it's a underrated gem of a film. It's Robert Redford kind of after his peak, so it hasn't got quite the cachet of his earlier work, but it's interesting. It's dark, but also uplifting.
Great.
So, The Last Castle.
The Last Castle. Great. Rob, what are you recommending? That we not recommending. What are we going to watch?
We're picking for next week.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I've been umming about what to pick for next week. And Sam and I did meet up weekend, and I discussed picking a film to watch, but I think I might save that one for later in the year. It's a bit too dark for the start of the year. So I think I'm going to go for.
When you said, I think it might be a bit too dark. I'm not going to pick it. The one I was thinking of that we discussed was Pitch Perfect.
Yeah, it wasn't that one.
Right.
It was the other one, the Italian one. They pick. No, I think I'm going to go for the 1996 film Scream.
Oh, great.
Wes Craven, Nev Campbell, Courtney Cox, Dave Arquette, Kevin Williamson, the rebirth of 90s horror. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Do get in touch on Twitter. You can talk to us both at Prestige Podcast.
Or you can find just me at Rob Kaiju.
Or just me at life_academic.
Till then, we will see you next week, guys. See ya.
Bye.
The Prestige is a Kaiju Industries production. Check out their other work at facebook.com/Kaiju Industries. Rawr!